Audio check. Teams audio check. Morning, everybody. 9:30. The inquiry is now resumed. Just a couple of housekeeping matters, and I'll pass over to Mr. Renshaw to cross-examine Mr. Witchells. There are some weddings today, we've been informed, outside. There may be a couple this morning in the foyer, so just mind how you go out there. Mr. Morehouse, yesterday you told us about the release, I think it was from the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy.
That's right.
Have you got the link to that? Are you going to submit the document to the inquiry?
I can get it. I've been sent a link to the information, so I can certainly get it and submit it if people would wish.
That would be helpful if you could put it in. I mean, I've had a quick look on the website this morning. I'm not sure I can see what it is that you're referring to. I can't see a press release from yesterday, but...
No, okay. I understand North Somerset were aware of it as well as us, so it's not something I think that...
I don't really mind who puts it in, but obviously it need to come in from somebody.
We'll simply liaise then, sir, so you don't have duplicates.
Do we want to canvass thoughts on how we're going to deal with it at this stage, or has anybody got any thoughts on it? Mr. Humphreys, is your team aware of it and what implications it might have?
So we're aware of it. We're just examining whether it has particular implications. It's a series of new carbon figures to be used in Green Book analysis. It makes it very clear at the beginning that it is not a forecast of carbon prices in the UK emission trading scheme. So it's carbon values to be used in Green Book analysis. We, like everyone else, have just seen it, and we're sort of having a look at it. And beyond that statement of the obvious, which the B's statement or website says sort of pretty early on, I don't want to comment at this stage.
Yeah, I think probably the best bet is, yes, if we can get the link confirmed, we can all have a look at it, and then, because I've not looked at it, and then I think on Tuesday morning I can take soundings as to what it is, what it says, what it might do to the parties' cases, and we can take it on from there.
Yes. One of the things that might help with just getting it to you, I noticed when I read through it yesterday, so it's on the department's website, and at the bottom it does say you can print this. So it would be possible, I think, to print it and then turn the print into a PDF, which could then become a document. Now, I'm not sure whether that print, because I haven't done it, then prints all the prices or it just prints the commentary, but frankly that's detail. We can sort that out.
Yeah, I think let's get access to it, have a look at it, and then Tuesday we'll hear from everybody as to what it may or may not do and how we proceed.
Okay, is there any other points from you? Okay, Mr. Renshaw, are you ready to go?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Witchell.
Good morning.
I don't intend to detain you too long. I intend to look at the requirement for low-cost parking, staff travel, future staff parking, availability and requirement, and policy CS 11. If I could start with the parking demand study, which emphasises the need for additional car parking that will come from primarily low-cost car parking. I refer you to the table I produced the other day, which I don't think has been uploaded as a document yet, which showed the proportion of low-cost to premium parking just by way of a summary, I mean, it was,
Are we going to need to have this table?
I've got a few spare copies, if anybody...
Yeah, I don't remember anything coming
sorry.
in, but... Let's just have
To be
one.
honest, I'm only going to make a passing reference to it, but you probably want to see the evidence.
Yes. We have a copy up here. Oh, it did. Oh.
Thanks.
Oh, yeah. It did.
If I could go to your proof of evidence, page 7, I think it's 77 in the PDF, paragraph 7.1.8.
Yes.
And you say, in conclusion, the PDS update identifies that 1,400 additional spaces from the existing 17,700 peak summer month spaces in 2019 would be required at 10 million passengers per annum by 2024. Now, the outstanding multi-storey car park from the extant permission would provide a net increase of 1,200 spaces, I understand. As the PDS is clear that the demand is for low-cost spaces and MSCP2 would be more expensive parking, that's not going to help in satisfying the demand for low-cost spaces, is it?
Well, this application is about a trajectory towards 12 million passengers per annum, and that's an interim position working towards that. So clearly the airport needs to manage how parking is provided and how it can operate that in the interim years, working towards what will be the required demand and number of spaces by the time 12 million passengers is reached.
But immediately, or had normal circumstances been in existence, the more immediate demand would be for low-cost parking. That's correct, isn't it?
The purpose of the low-cost parking provision and increasing that is to reflect the desire to reduce...
Sorry, could you speak up a little bit?
Sorry, to reflect the desire to reduce unauthorised off-site parking in the Greenbelt. So the purpose of the low-cost parking is to target that market, but of course we still have to provide a broad customer offer, so we need to provide the car parking closer to the terminal building within walking distance or shorter bus, and that's the premium pricing offer that the airport needs to provide. So there is a mixture of demand from customers.
Okay. If I could take you to your rebuttal at 4.3.3. You consider the option put forward by BALPA of gaining an extra 1,400 low-cost spaces, including an extra 400 net spaces overall, by enabling the staff parking in the silver zone to become low-cost parking with the staff moving north side. You say in that paragraph of the last sentence, there would be insufficient space for staff to park in the MSCP. Yep. And that is referring to a situation, I think, with 12 million passengers.
Yes.
Now, BALPA are not prescribing where north side staff should park, and as this would simply be a relocation from one part of the airport to another, I don't understand why there would be no space.
Because the space on the north side, the MSCP, is that different offer, is that premium parking offer. So there is a demand for that, as well as a low-cost demand. So you do need both available.
But it would simply be a transfer from one part of the parking to another, and at 12 million passengers, we've got 3 multi-storey car parks now with premium parking.
Yes, we have, and you'll have seen from the forecast that the total parking demand, including off-site, is over 30,000, according to the forecast. So there's a latent demand for those spaces on both sides. So both the multi-stories in the more premium offer and in the low-cost offer.
Yeah, so you say that there's been latent demand, and indeed in your proof at 7.1.13, you say there will still be a demand for higher cost parking.
Yes.
Due to their, I'll let you get there.
Yeah, attractiveness and convenience.
Still be a demand for higher cost parking options due to their attractiveness and convenience for those passengers who are less price sensitive. Now, the parking demand study update says that the total demand will be 22,200 spaces.
Yes.
For 12 million passengers, given the various assumptions about public transport use and all the other variables. However, it doesn't say how much premium parking is required. It simply refers to the need for low-cost parking. And if you just go back to 7.1.11 of your proof on just the page before, you note the factors that will lead to the demand for low-cost parking. There are a number of them there. But there's absolutely no evidence of what the demand might be for higher cost parking. Given the airport sought and got agreement to defer building the first multi-storey car park on commercial grounds and has had to lower pricing to attract custom to the multi-storey car park, why should the airport really want to go ahead with the multi-storey car parks?
As I said, the parking demand study and the tool behind it, that produces the forecast, examines the demand across the different car parks in total. So that total demand is split across all of the car parks. And the way the model works in terms of the forecast looks at the demographics and the income bands of those seeking to use the airport and projects those forwards. So that total 22,200 demand includes that split across the different demographics. And that is saying to us that there is an overall demand for the airport, on airport parking of 22,200, including full use of those MSCPs.
I'm not disputing the gross number. It's just how have you determined that there's sufficient demand for two additional multi-storey car parks?
Well, again, it's based on that demand profile from the demographics. So the parking demand study looks at how different income bands, different type of trip. So, for example, the business trips are less price sensitive. The smaller group sizes, those on higher incomes. And the projection is that those will continue to grow, as will the lower cost parking demand.
Well, that seems to fly in the face of the emphasis on the need for lower cost parking.
Well, because the emphasis on the lower cost part is to compete with the off-airport, unauthorised and greenbelt sites.
If there isn't sufficient low-cost parking, what do you think those looking for low-cost parking spaces will do?
Well, they'll look for alternative sites to park.
Perhaps if we could move on to staff travel. And if I could refer you to the the draft workplace travel plan.
Yes.
That's document 210, and take you to page 24.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm not there myself. But it says that the level of employee car parking will not increase beyond the 1,000 parking spaces located at the employee transport hub. As a result, employees will have to change mode, as there will be no alternatives when the demand exceeds supply. And it then goes on to say how this might be achieved. If I can refer you to paragraph 6.3.2 Sorry,
3.2.
that's page 25.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm got to get there myself. So at 632, it says the capped number of 1,000 spaces at the employee transport hub will encourage employees to car share more frequently as the total number of employees increases and pressure on the availability of staff of parking spaces grows. Now, there's talk in the workplace travel plan about matching lifts to staff, but
Yes.
many airline staff can't do this because they have different flight patterns each day and can never guarantee when the working day will end. I mean, who wants to be waiting around at night for their car sharer who's been delayed on another flight? Now, at 4.72 of your rebuttal, that's page 34, if I can take you back to your rebuttal, you refer to a more practical car sharing scheme. And what might you mean by that?
Yeah, so as we've set out in the travel plan, we recognise the different
So
types.
could
We
you
set
speak
out
up
in
a little bit?
we set out in the travel plan the different types of challenges we have with the airport and the shift patterns and the different types of working arrangement. And lift share is one of the mechanisms, along with personalised travel planning and other mechanisms. But what the airport is saying is it's the lift share scheme will just focus on staff at the airport rather than a broader catchment, and there will be other measures in place. So if you are in a car share scheme, things like a guaranteed ride home are part of the package, part of the offer. So if your usual sharer is delayed for any reason, then that would be part of the commitment. That would be one of the examples of how you deal with a situation like that.
Right. Then the next thing that the workplace travel plan talks about is improved public transport. And can I take you to your rebuttal again? Because in Mr. Hatton's proof, he made a lot of comments about the difficulties of public transport use. And so at 482 of your rebuttal, that's page 35. Have you made it?
Yes.
Yeah, good. You say a high proportion of staff are predicted to live within the areas served by these that's improved bus services. 1,235 out of 2,523 staff forecast to be working at the airport on any one day by the time it reaches 12 million passengers per annum. And you've listed a number of bus services that that could be improved. Now, in my calculation, that's still only 48% of staff living in these areas where public transport improvements are targeted. It seems to me they're going to have to perform very highly on sustainable travel to make up for those not living close to these routes. Do you agree?
I agree this is a stretch target. We have always said we wanted to be ambitious about achieving mode shift. And there is an analysis in my proof that looks at how that might be achieved for staff, which is based on that position that those new services could be provided. All of these things are dynamic, so you do need, this is a technical study based on a survey of a significant number of staff. So, as I say, you need the travel plan, and the travel planning coordinator role is a live thing. So that will need to be an ongoing process. of understanding what works and what doesn't work, and then investing in the areas where it does work to achieve that mode shift.
I mean, I can see that with your attempts to improve the passenger mode share for public transport, that you've documented clearly where you think that, how you can achieve that 2.5%, and that's good. The difficulty is that staff, particularly airline staff, they've got to get to work on time, otherwise the plane's late. They're not going to be keen to travel, take any longer travelling than is absolutely necessary. And a large number of staff, 60% according to the workplace travel plan, work at times shifts, and these shifts are very difficult in terms of travel. So how have you managed to assume that you're going to be able to get 70% of staff to travel by single occupancy vehicle, or no more than 70%? The
analysis in my proof of evidence at 6.5.24 is an illustration of how we may achieve that. So this is a future projection of measures that I think would be effective, targeted measures at certain catchment populations. And as you rightly say, there are some people who will need to drive. You know, there won't be an alternative that is practical for them. So we need to work through the travel plan coordinator role with those staff that may be able to change mode and encourage them to do so, put the measures in place to enable them to do so, recognising that for some people that won't be practical. So that analysis is there to say this is what I think could be achievable. These are the measures I've suggested, but it is a dynamic ongoing process.
Okay, well let's assume that the 70% target for single occupancy vehicles and 9% car share, which I believe is the target we're now working to, can be met. If I could take you to table 312 of the Transport Assessment Addendum, which is 220.3.
Page number?
It is page 24. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of difficulty with my mouse.
Did you mean document page 24?
I beg your pardon?
Was it document page 24 or PDF?
It is the document page
Right,
24,
yeah.
not the PDF page 24.
Thanks,
Yes,
yeah.
I'm sorry. And there, you're looking at employee. So, if I first of all take you to table 312, which is the page before, page 23, that gives the numbers of employees in the base year, 2,976, and then for the 10 million passengers and 12 million passengers.
Yes.
So, and you've very helpfully worked out the daily sort of trip generation for the 12 million passengers per annum. I've had a look at the existing, or at least the base year, should I say, that's the 2,976. Now, the daily employee trips are based on 58% of the workforce being at work on the average day. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So, if you multiplied the base year employment by 0.58, you get 1,726 employees at work on the average day in the base year. I hope you will accept that.
Yeah.
Correct. Now, to find the number of cars that were generated by staff coming to work on that day, you would multiply the 1,726 by the then single occupancy vehicle share of 84%.
Yeah.
And I tell you, that gives you 1,450 staff cars at the airport a day, but you've then got to add in the cars involved in car sharing, which is 3%, which adds another 52 cars. So let's say in the base year there's 1,502 staff cars coming to the airport a day, and there are currently 1,000 staff spaces, although we know there are a few for air traffic control elsewhere, and maybe the other odd staff spaces squirreled away for special people that we don't know about. Of course, it's a 24-hour operation, so all staff won't be there all the time. But of course, there's an issue of staff handover. But 1,000 spaces we have at the moment, and we have 1,500 car users a day. Now, if you go back to your table, which calculates the journey to work with the 12 million operation, you will see that single occupancy vehicles are 1,766. That's table 6.9.
Yes.
And then you add in the car share drivers, yes, which would make a total of 1,993 cars per day. And that's with 70% travelling sustainably. So if you look at the situation, you've still got an increase of staff travel of 491 cars per day, notwithstanding the best endeavours to secure sustainable travel. And if you applied the same sort of ratio of provision as today, and I believe today it was pretty tight for parking by staff when at full capacity. If you looked at the same ratio, say 1,500 staff coming by car, 1,000 spaces, if you applied that ratio to the 1,993 figure I've just given you, you would need a further 374 spaces. Now, what you say in your proof is that the intention is to monitor staff annually. But despite any monitoring, the numbers of cars travelling to the airport with staff is going to increase. So what is the airport going to do?
Yeah, this is a fairly typical challenge of workplace travel planning, where working with the authorities, one of the mechanisms to achieve the mode shift is to reduce available car parking, and that needs to be monitored. And part of this process is to continually monitor use of those spaces, understand who's using them, and whether they could adopt some of the alternatives that are being provided by the airport. Those gross numbers, of course, don't allow for the fact, as you pointed out, that the car park accumulation is the key thing, and that actually when you've got shifts with some arriving, some leaving, that doesn't necessarily translate to that number of spaces being required. So there would typically be a lower number of spaces needed than the number of staff on any one day because of that shift working approach. So it is going to be challenging. It is an ambitious mode share target. The airport is aware of that. It's been agreed with NSC that they will adopt this ambitious target, as with the passenger shift. And there will be a need for ongoing monitoring and review. One of the key parts being that travel plan coordinator and an element of personalised travel planning to try to achieve that shift. But I don't disagree, it will be challenging.
So if the airport decides to keep staff parking where it is in the silver zone and it needs more parking space, the inevitable consequence is it must reduce the low-cost parking in the silver zone.
That hasn't been looked at yet, so it would, if that were the case, the airport would need to explore whether firstly it can achieve the travel plan targets and the 1,000 spaces cap make that workable. If not, then there would need to be a further dialogue with the council about travel plan targets being met, but still needing that extra parking, and there would be a need, and it would be challenging to find somewhere else if that indeed were the case in the future.
If there's a migration of parking to unofficial sites because of limited low-cost parking, do you agree that the migration of staff parking north side into spaces less in demand for premium parking in the summer peak will help?
Well, our position is that the premium parking is needed in the summer peaks for passengers. So there wouldn't be sufficient reserved space in the premium parking.
But in the summer peak, the price of that premium parking is reduced significantly, isn't it?
The pricing varies throughout the year depending on what time you book, how long before your journey you book the parking. And yes, there's an element of variability in that pricing depending on how well used the spaces are. But
well, if I look at the current prices, the premium parking isn't a great deal more expensive than the silver, the lowest cost parking that they have.
No, I think at the moment, and most of the work I'm doing at the moment in transport is really difficult because we're not living in normal times, and obviously much lower use and fewer holidays means that there's a very low demand overall at the airport currently. So the airport has to manage its facility, and with the demands being so low, it doesn't need necessarily to have all the low-cost parking in Silver Zone. It can offer lower pricing in the multi-storey car parks on the north side. That will not continue if and when growth comes back up to the expected levels.
Perhaps you'll just turn to policy CS11, which policy says adequate parking must be provided and managed to meet the needs of anticipated users, residents, workers and visitors in usable spaces. BALPA have said that the development is contrary to that policy, but this isn't covered in your proof of evidence, where at 9.3 you respond to planning policy issues. Now, we've just talked about staff parking, and the policy recognises that just in the past that simply not providing parking spaces doesn't mean that cars aren't going to be used, especially in areas where, in rural areas and where public transport is very limited. Now, your proposal does not allow any increase in parking for staff, so isn't that contrary to policy CS11?
I don't think it is, no. I think the policy aim is clearly to ensure that the overall provision of infrastructure is managed effectively, and that needs to be read in conjunction with other policies about promoting more sustainable travel. And there is a balance to be had here. So the balance in this case is that agreed with NSC officers that a more stringent target for staff car parking should be applied, and that has been agreed with NSC, and NSC has agreed that it's not in conflict with that policy.
But is the policy consistent with statements in the workplace travel plan that you simply won't provide any more parking? It's just tough, hard luck for the staff.
Yeah, the travel plan's not saying that. It's saying that a tool to promote more sustainable travel is reducing car parking availability for staff.
But the travel plan does say there'll be no additional
Yes,
car
what
parking.
it's saying is if you're going to a workplace where you know there won't be a space available and you have an alternative, we would encourage you to take that alternative rather than to drive when there won't be a space available.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Renshaw. Right, Ms. Sutherland, are you ready? Do you have some questions for this witness?
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Witchell.
Morning.
I'm going to start with just picking up on one of the points that you mentioned there to Mr. Renshaw, and I don't intend to go into too much detail, but you said that the increase in low-cost parking reflects the airport's desire to reduce off-site unauthorised car parking. Is that correct?
That's one of the objectives, yes.
It's one of the objectives. Okay, thank you. Can we please look at the Wood report, the environmental statement? If I can take you, please, to page...
Could you give me the
Sorry.
reference, please? Could you give me the reference?
Sorry, it's CD... I think it's 255.
Not sure.
Scheme need and alternatives. That.
What document is it again, Ms. Sutherland?
Sorry, I believe it's... Sorry, sir, let me just check. I'm having to move between seeing you all and seeing the document. CD 255, which is the Wood report.
Okay.
There isn't a 255.
I think. Is it scheme need and alternatives 2.5.5?
That's yes, sorry, that's
Okay,
absolutely
thanks.
correct.
Which one is it?
2.5.5.
Oh, right.
Sorry, it comes up on here as titled CD 255, so my apologies. You've got that document now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So this document obviously is not authored by you, and I appreciate that, but nevertheless it is referenced in terms of the scheme need and the consideration of alternative schemes relevant to the evidence that you've given. In particular, this is looking at whether or not alternative car parking arrangements could be considered, and very similar to the Greenbelt, it looks at a sequential approach. If we can please look at paragraph 3.63, which I think is on page PDF 22. Are you there, Mr. Witchels?
Yes, thanks.
Lovely. Okay. Now, in here at 3.3.63, you say you've looked at alternative potential off-site car parking locations. And I understand, and I don't want to move across into Greenbelt issues here, but you say that you've reviewed those, and in the following paragraph, you set out reasons why certain of those sites were discounted. And then you move down to 3365, and it sets out why you consider that there are no suitable off-site park and ride sites. And I'd just like to explore that a little bit further with you. So at 3.3.65, you say that there's a number of constraints affecting deliverability, including distance from the airport, which would undermine customer experience. Have you looked at the scheme that was proposed for Heathfield Park?
The refused application, are you referring to?
That's right, yes.
Yes, I have looked at that.
You have. And did you see that within the transport assessment there were calculations and all sorts of information and data that say actually passenger experience would be the same, if not better, to that of people parking in the
It's
city?
not an inquiry into that.
Yeah, Ms Sutherland,
scheme.
I think we have set out a few times we were going to take quite a tight line with this. This isn't a beauty contest to promote your site. Okay, stick to this witness's evidence and asking questions on his evidence. We don't want to hear about that other site.
Okay, sir, thank you. At 3.3.66, you say there are no suitable off-site park and ride sites. Is that correct?
At the time of writing, that was the correct statement, yes.
And has that changed since?
No, we're not aware of any.
So there are no other suitable alternative sites available?
Well, we haven't seen any, no. That was part of this work undertaken by Wood looked at alternative sites as part of that sequential test approach.
And your parking... Sorry,
and that did determine that there were no suitable off-site park and ride sites outside the greenbelt to accommodate that additional growth.
Okay, and in relation to the parking strategy, it recommends that you continue to review and monitor the availability of these sites.
It does, yes.
Where is the review and monitor of these available sites included within the Section 106 conditions, etc.?
Yeah, that's part of the overall proposals to continuously monitor.
So this is part of the manage and monitor, is it?
Sorry, I missed that one.
So this is part of the monitor and manage approach?
It is part of the monitor and manage, yes. I was just trying to find the reference. I think it's in section 4 of my evidence. Yes, so in section paragraph 4.5.4, the measures proposed.
We're going to come to those in a moment, because those are all suggested measures that may or may not be included within a Section 106, aren't they?
Well, they're being offered as part of the Section 106.
But they may or may not be included in that Section 106. We don't have a final Section 106, do we?
We don't have the final, but the airport is offering these measures to be included in the Section 106 as part of this application.
And can you show me anywhere where it says in these measures that you would be looking at off-airport car parking, park and ride options?
Yes, in the later section, which is section 8.3 of my proof.
Are you referring to 8.3.4 as part of the parking demand and capacity report?
That's one of the measures, but there's also a proposal to monitor other applications for off-site car parks as part of the process.
Sorry, I can't find that. Perhaps you could help me.
I'm just looking for it. Sorry, it's in section 8.3.4, towards the end, the second bullet up.
Work with planning officers to identify any other proposals for airport car parking through monitoring planning applications.
Yes.
And to date, you've come across 2 planning applications, haven't you, that have been submitted, the Mead one and the one that I've been promoting.
Yes.
And you've objected to both, haven't you?
The airport has objected to those for a number of reasons.
I appreciate those reasons, but yes, the point is that despite what you're saying here, that you're going to work with officers to identify other proposals, you have in fact objected to the only 2 that have come forward to date.
Well, clearly, if NSC officers, as policy and strategy, are promoting another site that they do find suitable, then the objective of this is to work with those officers to say and understand whether that it could be part of the overall strategy and the ASAS. So if officers, NSC or any other authority close by that thought they could provide a site that was outside of the green belt and in all other ways could be permitted and provide the level of service needed, then that is what that bullet point is about, working with the officers. If the officers are agreeing that an alternative site should be provided and would be consented, then that would be something the airport would take into account in this monitor and manage approach.
Lovely. But of course, at the moment, nobody can make such an application because policy DM30 prevents it, doesn't it?
I don't think it prevents you making an application.
It prevents a successful application on the basis of the principle of DM30 requires that airport parking can only be provided with a hotel subject to a specific parking ratio. There is no allowance in policy terms in North Somerset for park and ride facilities, is there?
Well, that's North Somerset's policy as it stands. I mean, as I said, it doesn't stop you making an application, and the authority may, if in all other areas, decide that the proposal has significant merit, then it could give consent on balance because other policies are complied with.
You're absolutely correct. They could reach a balanced opinion to override policy DM30, couldn't they, if they considered it was a relevant way forward?
They
Park
could.
and ride. They could. Okay, so sticking with park and ride as an issue, can we please go to JLTP4, the adopted joint local transport plan?
Could you give me
I
the
think
CD?
CD7, yes, sorry, CD75. Have you got that?
It's just loading. A few more seconds.
It's okay.
Yeah, thank you. There now.
Okay, so I think it's PDF page 20, but it's actually page 39 on the paper copy.
Yes,
Have you got that?
I have, yeah.
Okay, so as you can see here, this is JLTP, this is adopted policy, and this was adopted significantly later than DM30, and it shows how the local authority, in conjunction with other local authorities, want to move forward. Can you see there on page 39, so the first, or as the page appears electronically, you've got 4 columns, and it's the third column, which would be page 39.
Yes.
And it says that Bristol Airport is required by government to produce an airport surface access strategy.
Yes.
And you agree that's the case, don't you?
Yes.
But at the moment, the airport surface access strategy is proposed to be delivered at some point after consent. has been granted. That's correct, isn't it? Within 6 months, I think.
It is, yes. The commitment is to update and produce a new surface access strategy should the appeal be successful. Clearly, if the appeal weren't successful, then you'd be dealing with a slightly different surface access strategy.
Of course. How long have you been developing this new surface access strategy?
Well, the surface access strategy, it's a bit like a travel plan. It's a dynamic tool, so it sets out a strategy framework, and the thing to do is implement the measures and monitor and manage those measures as you do them. So as I've set out, I think it's in table 2.4 of my rebuttal, the airport, whilst it doesn't have a document in hand as an updated ASAS, it has demonstrated that it is implementing the type of measures that the ASAS would include, and clearly that ASAS will need to be updated and a new one produced if this appeal is successful.
Why do you say it only needs to be produced if the appeal is successful? The airport is supposed to have an up-to-date airport surface access strategy at all times, isn't it?
Yes, I agree. The current ASAS, the 2012 version, should be kept updated, but in my opinion, the most important thing is that the measures are being implemented.
Absolutely, and you've drawn our attention to the fact that the airport have been implementing those measures over a period of time. We'll look at those in a bit more detail in a moment. But if we can carry on down that paragraph that I draw your attention to in JRTP4, can you see there? It says it will include options to improve connectivity across transport modes, including park and ride, bus services, highway junction improvements, exploring other opportunities, could be partly funded through 106, etc. Do you see that?
Yes.
And so here in the JLTP4, they look at improving connectivity using park and ride as one of the most important tools, don't they? It's the first thing listed before bus services, before highway junction improvements.
I don't agree those are in any priority order, and I think the inclusion of park and ride is part of an overall strategy for the area. So park and ride could mean park and ride in other areas to serve other functions.
This is specifically in relation to Bristol, sorry to interrupt, but this is specifically in relation to Bristol Airport. This is not about other public transport interchanges. It specifically says here, should be looking at other, yes, thank you.
Yes.
We need an up-to-date ASAS, but we don't have one. We need to be considering park and ride, but we've not been able to find any. Let's move on. You say that at the moment, there was another point to put on that one. The JLTP being the most recent, it's going to have greater weight in the planning balance, I would have thought, than DM30, which is from 2012, out of date. Would you consider that the JLTP just...
No, I think they're both adopted plans, so they both have weight.
They both have weight, and perhaps it's for your planning colleague to look at whether or not the weight to be given to them is appropriate.
But this is why I say planning balance. You do look at all policies, and initially it's for the authority to determine which one they believe has more weight, if one is in conflict with another.
Only if it's been put forward. No park and ride provision has been put forward by the airport, has it?
No.
You don't own any land where you could deliver park and ride?
In the context of this joint local transport plan, I think you need to read the whole sentence together and the whole section, actually, because it's talking about park and ride, local bus, highway and junction improvements, exploring tram, light rail, heavy rail. So it's in the context of that they're talking about all of these measures. So if you do, if you do in the long term, if you are able to deliver a mass transit system that links to the airport, then you may well look at a park and ride at one of the stations that feeds that.
Right, okay. You didn't answer my question, Mr. Witchells. The airport doesn't own any land on which they could put a park and ride, do they?
No, I don't believe so.
Thank you. Now, if we can go back, please, to your proof of evidence. Sorry, my error. Back to CD 5.5.5.
Was it 5 or 2?
Maybe 2.5.5.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. And if we can go to section 4 in that document, do you have the document there?
Yes, just scrolling down to it. Oh, no.
There's a 3.3, aren't there?
Sorry, 3.4, do you mean? I don't have a section 4.
Sorry, bear with me in case I've given you the wrong reference. It must be 3.4. Bear with me, I'm sorry about this, Mr. Witchell. I must have given you the wrong reference.
Is there a paragraph number you could give us? We could maybe find it then.
It is the 3.4.5.
3.4.5.
It's right towards the very end of the document.
Is that under the heading Alternatives?
That's correct, sir, yes.
That's PDF page 28.
Thank you, sir. Can you see there, Mr. Witchells, at the bottom, in terms of availability, you are saying that consideration has been given to on-site and components undertaken on project, etc., but there's nowhere there that says anything about off-site car parking. You've got to do nothing, and then it says strategic alternatives, but there's nothing there about off-site car parking, is there?
Yeah, this is in the context of the alternatives that have been explored in this report, and the alternatives to the overall development. So this relates to the whole planning application.
Yes, it covers all range of things there, but there's nothing in there about off-airport car parking. I think that's the small point I'm getting to. You'd accept that, wouldn't you?
Well, there has been an assessment through the sequential test, so it has been explored about whether there are options or other options to deliver the additional car parking.
We'll be looking at a sequential test in the Greenbelt discussion in a couple of weeks' time. But the point is, there's nothing in there, is there, about park and ride in this conclusion at the bottom?
It's not listed in this section, but it has been explored in that alternative sites assessment.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Witchells. The parking demand study, which is CD 2.11, hopefully.
Sorry, can you give me that reference again?
I'm so sorry. I think
2.11,
it's CD
right.
2.11, yes.
Right. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, if we can go to paragraph 1.4, which I believe is page 4.
Yes.
The document, have you got that there?
I have, yes.
And what you're effectively saying here is that there's growth. The airport has a demand for parking, and that demand creates the market for unofficial off-site car parking operators. Is that correct? So every time demand grows for parking, demand grows for off-site operators as well. Is that right?
Yes, demand grows, and if other offers are available, then demand would grow for those as well.
Okay, and how long has the Silver Zone low-cost parking been in place now?
You mean the current status of it? Or,
That's correct, yeah. Yeah. How long has the Silver Zone low-cost parking been available?
I can't give you a date for that, I'm sorry.
Would it surprise you to know that it goes back to 2008, 2009?
No, it wouldn't surprise me that there was some parking there in that far back.
So there's been, appreciate you're not able to give me a clear answer, but there has been Silver Zone low-cost parking for a considerable period of time, hasn't there?
Yes.
You might be able to help me more on this. Do say if you can't. How long has there been an enforcement officer in place, paid for by the local planning authority? Paid for by BAL to help with the... You don't know that one?
I can't give you an exact date, but I know it's been in place for some time. Since
at least 2015, I'm aware of. Would you agree that's about right?
I wouldn't challenge that. I'm not aware of the exact date, so that's fine.
Okay, but the use of OACP is still increasing, isn't it?
There is still demand for off-airport parking, yes.
And your documents show quite clearly that there's been an increase. You're saying here at 1.4 that there has been an increase and there's approximately 4,800 off-site parking spaces now. Yes. And in documents, sorry.
Yes, agreed. At the time of that survey, that was the position.
Absolutely. And in documents that I think, forgive me because some of the detail went flying over my head yesterday, but some of the greater detail that you went through with the council's advocate was considering the various different ways in which you had identified, and I think we've got to a point of saying there was a potential 4.2k delivery of off-airport car parking by, was it 2024, something like that?
I don't recall that discussion. By 2030, you mean?
By 2030, I'm so sorry.
By 2030, the forecast is showing a demand over and above that the airport is proposing to provide.
Okay. And setting aside what the airport is proposing to provide, it showed that there were, at 2030, there were 4.2k needed. But you say here at 1.4, there's already 4,800 parking spaces available off-site. So...
I'm not aware where the 4.2 comes from, but the forecasts are showing 22,300 being provided on the airport with a demand on airport of 22,200 and then a potential residual demand that takes you above 30,000.
So nearly 8,000 parking spaces then potentially not being able to be met on the airport.
Yes, as I say, it's part of this balanced strategy of constraining car parking, which is part of that overall package of measures.
But if there's 8,000 car parking spaces missing, even with the public transport measures, etc., you can't plug a gap that large, can you? 8,000 spaces is going to have to be delivered, and at the moment you're saying here nearly 5,000 those are delivered off-site.
No, we're not saying you should deliver all of the spaces that are coming up in the forecast, because we're trying to achieve mode shift. So, and has come up in the discussion earlier about employee parking. One of the mechanisms to do that is to limit the amount of available parking.
But there's an identified 8,000 spaces that you've got to somehow mitigate.
Yes, as I said earlier, there is a residual demand, and that's part of the challenge of this mode shift target.
So if we can please turn to section 6 of that document, which I believe is page 26. Sorry, the numbers cut off at the bottom of my printed copy. But it's section 6, impact of increased demand.
Yes.
And here you agree with what we were just discussing. Unofficial off-site airport parking capacity has increased.
Capacity has increased, yeah.
That's right. So we've agreed that low-cost parking has been in place for a considerable period of time, and we've agreed that an enforcement officer paid for by the airport has been in place for a long time, but it's still increasing. So that method isn't working, is it?
Well, I think this is part of the issue, that we're committing to all of these additional and new measures as part of this application. One of those is further additional funding for enforcement and working with NSC on that, and that will be part of our ambitious and challenging approach to achieving a more sustainable access to the airport.
But it hasn't worked so far, has it? So why are we continuing to propose it?
Well, as I've described in other areas, such as the public transport measures, not everything does work, and that's the reality of it. So you need to monitor and manage constantly and divert investment into measures that are working.
Can you demonstrate how you've monitored and managed those two particular measures to date?
Which measures?
The two measures I've been discussing with you, Mr. Witchells, the placement of low-cost car parking in the silver zone. How have you monitored and managed how that has an impact on off-airport car parking?
The airport has been doing its annual flyover survey to understand how much off-airport car parking is there.
An annual flyover survey?
That's my understanding, yes.
And that's it, is it? That's what the airport has done. So what does that annual flyover survey show us?
That's to assess how many spaces from that aerial survey can be determined, and then to check whether with NSC whether all of those sites are authorised or permitted.
Okay, and is that evidence before the inspector?
I don't believe the detail is there, no.
No. So we've got no evidence at all that these measures work, have we?
We don't have a detailed analysis of whether those measures work, no.
Well, you've not done the work, have you? You've not looked at that. You've just said.
I haven't done that work, no. But
no.
I'm suggesting it.
Has anybody else
to be done?
at the airport? Sorry, I'm speaking over you. I'm so sorry.
Sorry, no, not that I have seen. No.
Okay. So let's look at that a little bit more then. Where's the data and research in relation to your assessment at 6.1 that a significant proportion of off-site locations are unauthorised?
Well, I believe that's based on the consented uses of those areas.
And sorry, so there's been an assessment then. You just mentioned there weren't any assessments. There's been an assessment, is there, comparing the aerial survey with extant consents?
I haven't seen that assessment, but my understanding is
no,
it's been.
Right. So we don't think that assessment exists, do we? Actually, it's not been put in front of the inquiry. You don't recall seeing it, but you've reached a conclusion that this significant proportion of off-site locations will be unauthorised. On what basis have you reached that conclusion?
Well, my understanding is that's a dialogue with NSC officers and between NSC officers and the airport, and that's the.
So you've not seen.
I haven't seen that. I haven't, as I say, I haven't seen that.
So it's completely, that sentence makes no sense, does it? That's not to your knowledge, is it? It's something that you think might be the case.
I haven't seen that assessment.
No.
I think the problem with this is that it's the council that's the enforcement authority. We work with them and provide them with information, and they obviously carry out assessments of whether things are authorised and whether it is expedient to enforce against them. Obviously, Mr. Witchells is not really going to know the detail of that.
Whilst I appreciate your point, Mr. Humphreys, Mr. Witchells does make a very clear statement in his proof of evidence that a significant proportion of these off-site locations will be unauthorised, causing harm to the amenity of the area. And yet he has no evidence of that. And the local authority have not provided any evidence in relation to that. And
Well, shall we move on? I think the point's been laboured for quite a while now. I think we get the point that you're making, Ms. Sutherland.
We'll move on there, and it says these off-site locations typically require a transfer to the airport site. How are those transfers? How do they take place?
Apologies, I couldn't hear that question.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Slightly further down in 6.1, you say these off-site locations typically require a transfer to the airport site.
Yes.
That's correct, yes. How do those transfers take place?
Well, it would depend on the individual site, but they'd typically be by some sort of shuttle bus.
So a bus as opposed to a private car?
It depends on the scale of the operation, but it would typically be a minibus or a shuttle bus.
So they come by public transport. It's a minibus. And have you got any evidence in relation to that? Have you looked at who delivers passengers to the airport by bus as opposed to by car?
In terms of the detail of those car parks, we don't. We have obviously the CAA annuals, the survey that's done every 4 years, that gives us an indication. But not, I haven't got the detail by each operator and each car park. No.
No, nobody's looked into that, have they?
No.
Forgive me, I appreciate you're a transport consultant, but I'm assuming that you understand the concept of permitted development rights. Do you?
I'll say yes, but it depends on the question.
If it's for Mr. Melling, I can always ask him in due course. So you're aware of the fact that the airport have used permitted development rights to extend their parking operations on site?
Yes.
So, yes, within the inset, they didn't need consent. They could use permitted development rights?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. And that's perfectly lawful, isn't it?
It is, yes, if it's prescribed in those permitted development rights.
It's authorised, isn't it? So it's authorised, isn't it? It's lawful for the airport to use that.
Yes. There may be certain requirements associated with that permitted development. But
no, there's not. But that's a policy matter that I wouldn't expect you to know the detail of permitted development rights. It may be that I take it up with Mr. Melling, but the point I was trying to make is that you understand that permitted development rights mean that the activities carried out are lawful, subject to compliance with those permitted development rights.
Yes.
They are authorised, aren't they?
Yes.
By the permitted development order.
Yes.
What percentage of off-airport car parking is unauthorised?
As I say, I don't have that detail.
So we don't know whether it's unauthorised, authorised, official, unofficial?
No, we don't. We just know that the survey undertaken at the time came up with a figure of 4,800 spaces.
Okay. And we've characterised them as unauthorised despite not having that evidence? We've
characterised some of them as unauthorised, yes.
Where's the details in relation to authorised off-airport car parking in your statements?
That detail isn't in here.
Right, so we've not considered authorised, and we've not done a split between the existing operators to see who is authorised, who is not. And we've not looked at it, have we at all?
I don't have that split, no.
No. When someone uses the Silver Zone car park, am I right in thinking that they park their car and then they get on a shuttle bus to the airport? That's correct, isn't it?
Yes.
And so that is exactly the same as we've just discussed with off-airport car parkers, isn't it?
It depends on, there are all sorts of factors in there, so the quality and the level of service, the reliability, but essentially you are parking and transferring to a shuttle service.
Okay. And when you do your traffic counts in respect of that, do you count that as a car? So somebody is coming to park, or do you count it as a bus? They're getting on the shuttle bus from the car park.
Well, in the traffic counts, that would include both. So the car arriving would be counted, and the bus would be counted.
Okay, so even though people are using the Silversend car parking area, they're still counting towards the bus tally because they are double counted effectively. They then use the shuttle bus.
If you're talking about the mode share analysis, then no, they're counted as a car parked trip, not a public transport trip.
When are they counted as buses then, if it's not for the mode share?
Well, then they're not. They're counted, as I say, as a car parked trip in the mode share. So the means of access to the airport is counted as a car.
And how do we categorise those persons arriving from minibuses from off-airport car parking?
Well, they're categorised in the CAA analysis. So when the survey is undertaken, that is one of the options, parking at an off-airport car park.
And how are they categorised? Are they categorised as cars arriving at the airport? Or are they categorised as minibuses or buses arriving at the airport?
In terms of the CAA, those are categorised as public transport.
They are, aren't they? So off-airport car parking is actually significantly assisting your public transport mode share, isn't it? Under the CAA figures.
Yeah, I think it depends where the site is and the other effects of that site. But it could be.
I appreciate that there are many other factors for us to consider, Mr. Whitchells, but the reality is that the CAA figures take into account the buses coming from off-airport car parking as public transport, don't they?
Well, they go into detail, so they categorise them as car parked off-site. So we have that data.
Have you got much longer left, Miss Sutherland? Because we're over.
Yes, sir, I'm afraid so.
Well, we've overshot your allocation already, so.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't give a time scale, sir. That allocation's been imposed on me, and I'm afraid I do need a right to properly cross-examine the witness in relation to my client's case.
Well, we got half an hour down, was what you gave us. How much longer are you
No,
going
that's what I had imposed upon me, sir. I did not give you half an hour.
Well,
that's
not,
what is listed
Miss Sutherland, Miss Sutherland, I'm not debating with you. I'm just asking how much longer you're going to be.
So I would expect to be at least another hour.
No, that's not going to be acceptable. Just 1 second, we're going to have a short adjournment. Ms Sutherland,
So,
you've got the timetable and it's clear on there what your allocation was. We're going to give you 15 minutes.
I'm sorry, sir. I'm going to have to take issue with that decision on the basis that I did not indicate in the timetable that I would require half an hour. That was done by the programme manager, and I consider that if I'm not allowed to cross-examine this witness properly, then I'm not being given the opportunity to be heard. I appreciate it's important to keep to the timetable, but that should not be at the expense of natural justice.
Ms Sutherland, you were asked by the programme officer on several occasions to give your time estimates, and you didn't respond.
I did respond. I said that I was...
At my suggestion, given the nature of your case, which focuses on a particular point, I, in fact, put half an hour on. That has been half an hour on the programme in 3 or 4 different iterations. Everybody present in this room and virtually has been expecting the timetable to be approximately as it is. As my colleague has just indicated, we'll give you another 15 minutes. If you wish to make a point of that, you can obviously make a complaint subsequently.
Thank you, sir. So, Mr. Whitchells, continuing to look at para 6, your figure 23, estimated off-site car park capacity, there's estimated 4,800. That's 2017, and yet we know it's going to grow, don't we?
No, we're stating there what the capacity is from that survey. So we're not confirming it's going to grow. We're saying demand could grow.
Right. Okay. I'm just going to take you back to the points that we were discussing just now in relation to the measures being proposed. Because here at 6.3, you say, when Bristol Airport implements the entirety of its car parking strategy, you will meet demand. But you won't, will you? Because that demand is still going to have to be met off-site.
Yes, there could be some additional off-site demand.
And any excess capacity at the airport could meet parking demand, which is currently being met by unauthorised providers. What leads you to that conclusion?
It's simply that if the airport has an offer that's attractive and competitive, then those passengers could choose to park on airport.
But you've already said that there are 8,000 parking spaces short. Where are they going to go?
Those are the demand forecasts, yes. So we're saying we are, in the context of our commitment to seek to reduce general traffic on the roads, we wouldn't want to over-provide parking on the airport site.
Okay, so we've got no evidence at all, have we, that low-cost parking is going to, in any way, address off-airport car parking? You've already accepted that. We're saying here, though, that if we could have some excess capacity, that might help. And yet you seem to be saying to me that actually that's unless the airport come up with an exceptionally good offer in terms of price. That's right, isn't it?
No, it's a whole package of measures. So if we can move towards that monitor and manage approach, and with respective future investments in surface access measures, including public transport, clearly the aim is to not have to provide more and more parking beyond that 2030 point for 12 million passengers.
But you're saying that off-airport car parking is going to continue regardless, and you've accepted that two of the measures that you propose don't work, haven't worked historically, yet you are going to continue to propose them as creating part of a system of measures that are going to achieve the end result. Why are we proposing things that we haven't actually reviewed, that we don't know if they work, and have been ongoing for specifically a long period of time? Why are they even forming part of this? Why do we think that this is going to somehow make a difference?
Well, as I said earlier, in fact, if something doesn't work, that needs to be reviewed and needs to be changed. So part of the commitment going forward.
But it hasn't been changed, has it, Mr. Witchell?
It hasn't been changed. That's what I said. Going forwards, it obviously needs further analysis and further investment in with working with NSC officers in how that can be better managed. And there is a fund available to do that.
But that's not worked. That fund has been available to do that, hasn't it, since 2015, and it's not worked.
Well, what do you mean by not worked? You mean there is demand for off-airport parking?
Well, you yourself, your evidence demonstrates that there's nearly 5,000 parking spaces out there, and that's purely, as we now know, from an aerial drone survey. So it doesn't identify any covered land, it doesn't identify any sites within buildings, etc., etc. It just looks at approximate numbers by sending a drone over. You've done no other work in relation to off-airport car parking whatsoever.
Yeah,
But
which is why it's proposed to do that work.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that at some point the airport may or may not do that work, but they've not done it for the last 10 years.
Well, I don't think it's fair to say they've not done it. They've done that work and been in dialogue with NSC officers.
But that work's not in front of the inspector, is it? And you haven't seen it. but you've
No.
made assumptions on work that's not in front of the inquiry, and you've come to the conclusion. And I draw you back to the point I started with. You said the increase in low-cost parking is specifically to reflect the desire to reduce off-site unauthorised parking. That was the point you
Right, it's why I
agreed
said
with
it's
me.
one of the objectives.
It's one of the
Well,
objectives.
Yes, it's
But
part of the overall.
that objective doesn't work, does it? So it doesn't work.
Well, there is demand for silver zones, so there is a requirement to provide it for those lower cost customers who are in that price market.
I'm not disputing that you don't need to provide low-cost parking. You're saying you need to supply low-cost parking in order to prevent off-airport car parking and what you term as deleterious adverse amenity impacts. But that's not actually what's going to be achieved, is it? There's no evidence of that at all.
Of course it would help achieve that, because if we didn't provide any more low-cost parking, then they would have to find alternative sites to park.
Which would simply increase, wouldn't it? If you didn't provide it, then off-airport car parking would increase
Yes,
even
that's
more
the
than
point,
it has
that
been.
The point is we do need to provide it, otherwise those off-site sites will increase because there'll be a market for them.
Well, there is a market for them already, isn't there? Because your price structure doesn't deal with this.
Well, it does. It caters for a market, so the silver zone is catering for that lower cost market.
Can we agree that throughout your proof of evidence, you refer continuously to desire for low-cost parking driving greater demand for the provision of low-cost parking?
Yes, that's part of the offer that the airport makes. Part of it's low-cost parking in silver zone, and part of it's more premium parking closer to the terminal.
Okay. Can we go to your 7.25? So I think that's page 36.
Can you just confirm which document we're in?
Oh, I'm so sorry, sir. Within Mr. Witchell's proof. Oh, sorry, no, CD 2.11, we're still in the parking demand study. So 2.11, parking demand, page 36, paragraph 7.25. Have you found that, Mr. Witchell?
Yes.
And this is in relation to your position that additional parking capacity is required to meet the demand. That demand is there. I don't disagree with you in relation to that. But at 7.25, you say that one of the reasons that airport car parkers use the off-site parking, and quite clearly here at your figure 37, is because it's the cheapest. Yes?
That's one of the reasons, yes. There are others.
Yeah, there are other reasons, yes, but nearly half of them are price-driven, aren't they?
Yes.
And on average, it's less expensive to park in an OACP than it is within airport parking.
That was the position at the time of that data, yes.
It's still the position at the moment, though, isn't it? There hasn't been a pricing review to look at undercutting OACP, has there?
Yes, there's some of them are around the same, some of them are cheaper than silver zone.
Sorry, where's that evidence from?
That evidence isn't in here, that's just searches I've done when looking at parking pricing for Bristol Airport.
And so you've not brought forward any evidence, have you, to demonstrate that the airport pricing is in any way commensurate with the OACP pricing?
That detail isn't here, no.
No. Have you seen the detail that I submitted to the inquiry in relation to this?
I've seen your evidence, yes.
So in relation to that, would you agree? I mean, you've put it here at 7.25, Silver Zone at 65 or 64.99, so £65, and same length of stay at about 53. So there's quite a significant difference in pricing there, isn't there?
There was at the time of that data, yes, but as I say, there are other factors in choosing where to park, so it's not just about the price.
No, but you have made a large part of your case is in relation to the need for low-cost car parking, and that low-cost car parking is going to deliver improvements and reduction of off-airport car parking. That's what the airport want, isn't it? They want to increase their market share. They're losing 20% of their income base to off-airport car parkers.
No, that's not the primary aim of that. The aim is to provide the low-cost parking for customers in a compatible product, but obviously with the added security and reliability of the airport services, and to seek to prevent further off-site parking in the Greenbelt.
Airport parking charges are at the behest of the airport, are they not?
Yes.
They can decide how much they charge, whether it be for low cost, premium, or any other, yes?
Yes, but I'm not going to purport to be an expert on this, but there is competition law that prevents them artificially changing that for long term.
I think we referred to this competition law letter yesterday, didn't we? And it's something that's probably above most of us. But what you're effectively saying is the airport are not allowed to reduce their parking costs or rearrange the parking.
I didn't say they're not allowed to. I said.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Perhaps I'll ask you the question again then. You were saying that the airport have full control of their parking. That's the point I put to you. You agree with that?
Sorry, subject to them not breaching competition law. Yes, they do.
Okay, and setting aside competition law, because none of us really understand it here, I'm sure there will be legal submissions on it in due course. It is completely under the control of the airport as to how much they charge for parking.
Yes.
Thank you. So I don't know where I'm going on time, but I still have more to ask.
We've got about 5 minutes.
If we continue with that document, over the next page at 7.27.
Yes.
Your high-level analysis indicates that low-cost parking option is better to meet customer needs, and there's more underlying demand for it.
Better than MSCP3, so that's comparing the two.
While also being better positioned to reduce the market share of unauthorised off-site providers.
Reduce the market share, yes, by providing an offering that's higher quality and not too much higher price.
What is the current market share?
Between what? Between on and off airport?
Well, you're saying here it's to reduce, you are better positioned to reduce the market share of OACP if you provide low-cost parking.
Yes.
And yet I've put it to you already that the provision of low-cost parking has absolutely no impact on the market share, and you've accepted that. So this is wrong here, isn't it?
I didn't accept it has no impact. I said it is an offer. The Silver Zone is an offer for low-cost parking, and it is attractive. It does.
I'm sure. Yes, it is an attractive option, but the point is, Mr. Witchell, you've not put forward any evidence whatsoever that supports your continuous assertion throughout your proof of evidence that if you provide low-cost parking, it will prevent or reduce OACP. It's simply not the case, is it?
Well, it won't prevent someone applying for an OACP and trying to start one up.
No.
If that offer is
In
there.
respect of the existing, we've already looked at applying for. There's no policy support for it. This can only be delivered using PD, and we've agreed, haven't we, that PD is authorised and lawful, but you've got no evidence as to how much is authorised or lawful.
No, I don't have that.
No. Parking Summit Action Plan. That's another one of these measures you refer to.
Yes.
Is that in front of the inquiry?
It's not in my evidence, no.
Is it in front of the inquiry at all?
And not that I'm aware of.
Have you seen it?
No, I haven't seen it.
Do you know what the action plan is?
I've been advised by the airport that it's based on a series of consultations with communities and officers, raising issues such as measures that taxi drivers parking in streets, trying to reduce parking in community areas, and it's looking at measures to try to mitigate and reduce those, as well as off-site operators from sites that are in green fields, for example.
You understand the drift of what the Parking Summit is supposed to do. There was an action plan and it was created in 2018, but to date nothing has been actioned on it. I think you're at a bit of a disadvantage here if you've never seen it.
Well, my understanding is there has been investment with NSC and an enforcement officer.
Absolutely, that's the only thing that's been delivered, and we've already discussed that hasn't changed the delivery of OACP, has it? Hasn't made any difference whatsoever.
I don't think we can say it hasn't changed anything. The purpose of the enforcement officer is to review impacts of parking, indiscriminate parking. So I haven't got the data, as I said, but I would expect that to have had
because you've lumped all off-airport car parking together as one big unauthorised lump somewhere over here that requires enforcement action. You've not looked at what's authorised and what's not. You've not done that work. So,
we've accepted that there is authorised and unauthorised. So we haven't got the details.
You have accepted that today, yes.
We've always said we've never said it's all unauthorised. There is a mix.
Have you provided any breakdown of that mix?
I've said I don't have that data.
No. So referring to the fact that there is some sort of mix, and yet all of the references in all of the documents refer to unauthorised, don't they?
Well, they're referring to preventing further growth of unauthorised off-site parking.
So everything that's not Bristol Airport is considered as unofficial, isn't it, by the airport?
There's a difference. What the airport refers to as official is the parking within its control, the Bristol Airport parking.
That's right. So unless it's Bristol Airport parking, it's all considered unauthorised or unofficial?
No, not unauthorised. The unofficial phrase is really an internal airport phrase about the stuff they control.
Right. So what it comes down to is the airport has no control over off-airport car parking at all, does it?
No, it doesn't have the enforcement. That sits with the local authority in any enforcement action.
But you have funded enforcement action in order to try and have that impact, and it hasn't had that impact, or at the very least, you've not been able to bring forward any evidence in relation to that impact.
No, which is why I say it needs to be part of the monitoring package.
Okay, so when we go back to this monitoring package, you've already accepted that, unfortunately, you don't have a copy of the Summit Action Plan, and that's not been brought forward, but that is included as one of your measures. I put it to you that action plan, having been there since 2018 and taking over a year for its minutes to be provided to the parish councils that attended, and no formal minutes ever having been produced, is not something that's going to deliver any improvements either.
Well, it certainly has the potential to deliver improvements. If we're going to, as part of a commitment, invest further in it, then, as I say, it needs to monitor what has worked and what hasn't worked, and introduce new measures.
There's no commitment to funding in relation to the Parking Summit Action Plan. It's the result of two meetings, one in 2018, one in 2019, by people invited by the airport.
Well, there is a commitment from the airport, or in the 106, the draft 106, to continue with the action plan, and there are funds available.
But we don't know whether or not those action plan, they've not been met. You don't know. I'm sorry, I'm putting a question to you that you don't know the answer to, because that work has not formed part of the work that you've carried out.
Right, I think at that point, Ms Sutherland, we are going to wrap it up and have a short adjournment. Just a few comments before we do. Obviously, doing the timetabling is an extremely challenging job for Miss Vincent. She tries her best to do that, and she's only as good as the information that she's provided. What I suggest, and that goes for all the Rule 6 parties, all the parties to this inquiry, is that when we do send out requests for time estimates, that you respond, look at that carefully, and give us your best estimate. What you also need to be doing is looking at the timetables when they are released, which is they are updated regularly. So, Ms Sutherland, can I suggest that you look forward over the next few weeks and see if there's any other issues with the timings that we've put down for you, and hopefully then we won't have a repeat of the situation that we've had this morning. Right, let's take 15 minutes, no more, and then we will come back and we'll hear from Miss Beth.
So, may I just raise one issue? It's Mr. Morehouse over here for PCAA. I've had a discussion with Mr. Davis and Miss Beth about the cross-examination that we both intend to carry out. There is an overlap, and it's been suggested that I go first, which will reduce the questions that they then have to ask. I hope that helps.
No problem. Okay, we'll resume at 25 past. The inquiry is adjourned. Shall we start with that?
Mr. Morehouse is going to refer to that.
Right. Okay, 25 past, the inquiry is now resumed. Just before we go to Mr. Morehouse, just a couple of points.
Yeah, just a couple of matters, and first one for the airport, and my apologies if this has got lost in the translation, as it were. I've got the supplementary proof on climate change electronically. I don't think I've had a hard copy of that.
Right, we will make sure you get one. Sorry about
It's by no means desperate. I've already read it electronically.
Yeah, no.
But I'd rather have a hard copy at some point.
Completely understood.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No.
you can take that
Yeah,
that
no.
will be done.
No problem at all with that. The other thing to mention is looking at the timing of today's session. I think what we've concluded is that for those who put a lot of work into the conditions and the 106, please don't panic because that work is much appreciated. But I think what we're going to do is not have a conditions and 106 session today. One reason is timing, but the other reason is that particularly actually in both documents, there are a number of places where the parties have indicated different approaches or simply disagreement. But where there's a different approach being indicated, we actually thought it might be more helpful if we reflected on it in a bit more detail and indicated, obviously without prejudice, what our preferred approach might be. I don't think we're ready to do that today, leaving aside the timing issue. So what we're going to do is send out a note during next week, giving our thoughts and comments on those three documents that have been handed in. That's the rolling conditions, the rolling 106 extract, and the highway, what are they called? The Highways England, or whatever they are now called. National Highways. And Mr. Young's going to comment on that in just a moment. So no conditions session today, but we'll go back to all of the main parties with our thoughts on it. And of course, it was only ever designed to be an interim session because in about, a month, we've got a full-blown session on conditions, but we thought that our views might be more useful in a slightly more considered fashion. So we'll finish today after the re-examination of this witness.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, just the only thing I was going to say was National Highways have put in a note. So you've seen that, and I've kind of just gone over it this morning.
We have seen it.
One thing in there that I probably want to ask Mr. Witchells about, but I'm going to do it at the end because I don't want to sort of break up the cross-examination.
We obviously we couldn't see him, but we didn't think there'd be any objection, ping that document on to him in case you wanted to ask anything. Having said that, I know Mr. Witchells has all sorts of problems this morning. I think he was delayed for some period in a lift, and so may not have been checking his emails. And so you might just need to give him 5 minutes to it's quite a long letter. Just read through the letter.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very straightforward thing. I don't think he's going to need to do any prep.
Fine.
But if he can't answer it, he can say so. Right then, Miss Morehouse, are you ready to go?
Thank you, sir, yes. Good morning, Mr. Witchell.
Morning.
Your attention's been directed to the North Somerset Council Core Strategy number 23. And that sets out that proposals for Bristol Airport will be required to demonstrate the satisfactory resolution of environmental issues, including the impact of growth on surrounding communities and the surface access infrastructure. And we can see that at the reference called CD 506, page 97. So that is a policy document and an objective that we're working towards. I raised it in advance when, I don't know whether,
yes,
I'm sorry,
I've got
Mr.
it, thank you, yes.
Witchell, I hope.
Yes, thanks, I have.
I was trying to save time by letting people know.
Thank you.
Are you happy if I proceed, Mr. Humphreys? I don't want to hamstring you by proceeding quickly. No, thank you. Thank you. Now, I'm not, and I'm sure everyone will understand, I'm not intending to go through all of the aspects of the proposed surface access infrastructure changes. But one of the issues that I would like you to comment on is the whether or not you think that the proposals that are being advanced adequately deal with the impact on the areas surrounding the changes that are being put forward. And so, for example, I'd invite your attention to the A38 junction with the A4174, which is the Bristol Ring Road. There have been proposals and discussions in relation to that particular roundabout, which are around improving the traffic flow through that roundabout. Yes?
Yes.
And so far as those proposals are concerned, can we also agree that from the location of that roundabout, essentially it lies just south of Bristol, with the main roads coming off it being the westbound and eastbound A4174, the Bristol Ring Road, and then the continuation of the A38 going into Bristol?
Yes.
The roundabout itself effectively sits in a field. I think there's a farm next to it. It's not a destination itself. It's simply a conduit for people to go to other places.
Yes.
And so what I'm interested in is the analysis that you've carried out about having smoothed the passage of traffic through that roundabout, the analysis of where that traffic's going and the impact of that traffic. So have you, for example, conducted an analysis of westbound traffic that would go along the A4174 and end up, for example, at Ashton Gate?
You're referring to non-airport traffic?
I'm referring to all of the traffic, because what we're looking at here is the additional traffic of the airport added to existing traffic, aren't we? That's what we're analysing.
We are, yes. But as you'll have read, my assessment focuses on the impact of the airport traffic on those existing junctions, allowing for broader traffic growth at those junctions as well. So it accounts for the traffic growth at each junction and the airport traffic impact on top of that.
At the junction of the A38 and the A4174. Just so that we're clear, I haven't seen, for example, let's take another example. I haven't seen an analysis of the impact of the airport traffic, for example, in Bedminster. If you follow the A38 into Bristol, there's going to be additional traffic.
Yeah, in terms of the extent of the study area and the junctions assessed, that goes back to our scoping stage of the transport assessment, where we had early dialogue with North Somerset and Bristol City to understand where they expected us to assess impact. We also, in the context of transport assessment guidelines and environmental impact assessment guidelines, were mindful of that. So both of those were taken as the context for which junctions needed a detailed assessment.
Now, do you agree as a matter of principle, for example, that there will be additional traffic travelling in on the A38 into Bristol as a result of the expansion?
That additional traffic on the A38 is recorded in my analysis, yes.
So going beyond the A38 roundabout with where it meets with the A4174, I'm talking about, do you agree that there will be additional traffic travelling into Bristol as a consequence of that expansion?
Yes, as I say, we agree there will be additional traffic, but the thresholds for assessment fall below that. So it was agreed with officers of all of the transport authorities what the extent of the assessment would need to be, and that. So whilst there may be extra traffic there, it was accepted that those numbers were sufficiently low that it wouldn't warrant detailed assessment and impacts wouldn't be severe.
Obviously, I act for the Parish Council Airport Association and not those two authorities. And
yes.
so, just so that we're clear, whilst I understand your position in relation to that, I'm not expecting you to have followed this, but and I'll raise a concern about the eastbound traffic now on the B4174 from the A38 roundabout, because if you follow that road along, it joins eventually with the A4 at Brislington. And that is the A4 is the main road, for example, between the Baines area, Bath and Bristol.
Yes.
And we heard evidence from Councillor Warren early on in these proceedings that the reason why people don't choose to travel along that road and use that way, and in fact go via Chew Valley Lakes and the other areas, is because of the tremendous weight of traffic in that area and the delays. So what I suggest is whatever the assessment, whatever you were told so far as the assessment is concerned, the reality of the situation for people is very different. Do you concede that that could be the case?
The position we've taken is that we have to look at the magnitude of the impact of the airport traffic, and where that magnitude is low, which is obviously the further away from the airport you get, the lower the impact will be, that there is no requirement to assess those links or junctions.
Now, the impact of that traffic as it stands, has been described by the local MP, Dr. Liam Fox, in the following terms: in all my communications about the potential expansion of Bristol Airport, my main concern has always been the congestion of ground transportation and the impact it has on the quality of life of my constituents. So that's the current position. Do you accept that additional traffic isn't going to make that any better?
Well, I haven't seen Mr. Fox's analysis, but our assessment shows what we believe the additional trips will be as a worst case robust impact assessment assumption basis, and those areas you're talking about, the traffic flows and the impacts from the planned development are not severe. In fact, they're so low that the authorities didn't require us to assess them. Well,
that isn't the evidence of some of the people who've given evidence to this committee as to their own experience. That's what I suggest. But you've approached authorities and they haven't asked you to do that.
Yeah, Ms. Morehouse,
yes.
These questions might have been better put to the council's highway witness. They agreed the scoping study. This witness did what they were told to do in terms of the scoping,
yes,
which was agreed. So it's hard.
The next question, though, comes back to that core strategy, because the requirement under the core strategy is that Bristol Airport will be required to demonstrate there's a satisfactory resolution of the environmental issues, including the impact of growth on surrounding communities and surface access infrastructure. So there is a policy requirement for the airport effectively to displace this.
Yes, and this application for an additional 2 million passengers has been assessed on that basis, to assess the impact of the growth from 10 to 12 million passengers, yes, in that context.
And I just want to deal with one aspect of this matter, which was raised, I think, by Mr. Young in a question to you about Mrs. Burns' evidence about the PCAA's position about that junction in particular. And I think it was suggested that there was a suggestion that the roads shouldn't be improved because it simply moves the problem on elsewhere. In fact, the PCAA's position isn't against road improvements, which clearly might benefit all sorts of people, but whether or not that road improvement, in fact, deals with the core strategy requirement of whether or not it actually resolves the current environmental issues, particularly the additional growth that's anticipated by the airport and the impact on communities. Because let's take an example. If more cars are not queuing at the A38B 4174 junction, and in fact are driving into Bedminster, and stop in Bedminster in traffic jams in Bedminster, which clearly local people would be concerned about, they're now polluting in an urban area, aren't they? The impact of what's going on, in fact, is a lot higher than simply queuing in a roundabout in an open space. Do you agree with that as a principle? Urban queuing is worse than and to be discouraged.
But we looked at the air quality results, and some of the receptor sites, I think it was the HR sites, were up around that area, and I mean they were absolutely minute changes in air quality.
The point I'm making is that, or the question I'm asking is, as a matter of principle, is it better to have people queuing in urban areas or in rural areas from the point of view of public health?
As I said, my evidence and my analysis is looking at the impact of the additional traffic from the airport on the road network and showing where that may be significant, and if it is, what we can do to mitigate that impact. So those flows feed into noise and air quality assessments, and those assessments look at what they call sensitive receptors. In that case, I think the point you're making is if there are fewer sensitive receptors, that may be better than if there are lots of sensitive receptors. But again, that is assessed in that environmental impact assessment through those noise and air quality tests, and in the transport work through the understanding what the impact of the additional traffic would be.
Same theme, slightly different subject. I'm just going to pick on one example. The plans that are being put forward, do you agree as a matter of principle, don't address the impact of additional traffic on the small villages that surround the airport? And one example I give is the village of Felton, which is to the east of the airport. There are no proposals that would affect, for example, the evidence of Kay and Colin Wooler, who talk about 30 vehicles per half hour travelling through their village at the moment. There's no proposals to assist that situation at all with what you're putting forward, are there?
Well, the proposed improvements at the West Lane junction are designed to prevent that queuing. So the queue being removed would benefit those wanting to drive out of Felton. So the community of Felton would benefit from having much lower congestion on West Lane at the A38. In terms of the numbers, again, it's based on the impact.
Okay.
And we've agreed with the authorities, the transport authorities, where the impact is potentially measurable and significant, and tested those impacts.
I mean, I chose Felton as one example. Winford, there are no provisions, that's slightly to the east of there, there are no provisions to reduce traffic or to somehow deal with the additional traffic through there, are there?
No, again, it's been... Sorry.
Well, I mean, it's just worth pointing out, if we're going to get a lot of questions along this line, and it does come up at inquiries quite a bit, the developer's obligation is to mitigate the impact of their development. It isn't to solve existing problems, and it's a common mistake that's often made. So if you can just bear that in mind when we're asking the questions, it's about the impact of this development. Yes. It's not about what's happening now or in the past.
The evidence of Kay and Colin Wooler in their proof was that they estimated, I think, some 30 vehicles travelling to the airport going through Felton in a half-hour period. I thought we had agreed that this proposal, and perhaps it's my error for not covering it in detail before, this proposal is inevitably going to lead to more road traffic, isn't it? An increase in the number of passengers.
That's what we're discussing.
Yes. So I took that as a given. So, and do we agree that a proportion of those will increase traffic will go through villages such as Felton and Winford and places like that?
Yes, that's
Okay.
also my evidence of recognition of
And
that.
so far as the impact of what is taking place, rather than dealing with the concerns and the impact on the surrounding community for Felton and Winford, what I'm inviting you to do is to explain, in accordance with the core strategy policy, that Bristol Airport is required to demonstrate the satisfactory resolution of environmental issues, including the impact of growth on surrounding communities and surface access infrastructure. The surrounding communities would include the people like Kay and Colin Wooler in Felton. So the question, I suppose, or people living in Winford or elsewhere, the question is, what are you doing in relation to those people to alleviate the concerns against the background of increased traffic?
Well, again, as I said, we've looked at the impact of that traffic in terms of the flows, and where those flows are significant, as agreed with the transport authorities, we've assessed those impacts, and West Lane being an example where the West Lane improvements are proposed.
And so
where the impacts are insignificant, then no further improvements are proposed.
And yours is an assessment of what the impacts are. So would you agree that the subjective view of people living in those areas may differ from your assessment because of the nature of the villages themselves and the roads that people are travelling on?
Yes, I would agree that their subjective view could differ.
And so the impact on those communities is an impact on those people and their views of what they're living with, isn't it?
For them as individuals, yes.
There are no proposals, for example, to improve the B3130, which is the Chew Magna road that runs effectively that people use to get from Baines to the airport.
No proposals as part of this application, no. But there is as part of the 106 draft, a proposed highway improvement fund and an ongoing dialogue with authorities. So if there are any proposals that come forwards that the airport may assist with, then that's the purpose of that.
And just so we're clear, I know you hadn't read Dr. Fox's statement or heard it, but you're not suggesting that in some way that by him talking about his main concern has always been the congestion of ground transportation, he's not likely to be fantasizing something like that, is he? He's likely to be basing that on his constituents' concerns. And
yes, I said I hadn't seen his evidence, so I haven't seen the evidence,
yes.
and he will be reporting whatever he's been told by his constituents.
Yeah.
But as I say, I don't think there's any evidence behind that.
You see, there is a concern that effectively by the difficulty with Bristol Airport is that there aren't alternative public transport systems that readily work, are there? Buses have to share the same roads as cars. It's a single carriageway on the A38 and to other places. There's no rail link. It's not...
Yeah, I mean, that's why there are a series of public transport improvement measures proposed.
Yes, and as a transport planner, it's not how you would have designed a system to feed an airport with 12 million people, is it?
That's hypothetical, yes.
Sorry?
Hypothetically, in a perfect world, airports would be at railway stations in the middle of nowhere, yes. But we're not in that place, no. Unfortunately.
And so what we're dealing with is the real world constraints, the real world limitations, not the hypothetical, aren't we?
Yes, of course, and that's what we've assessed.
And that brings me on to the last topic I want to invite your observations on, which is about the modal shift, because you've indicated that in your evidence that you thought that 2.5% modal shift was achievable, but nothing more than that. That was I'm summarising the position.
I've assessed the the catchment area and the measures we're proposing, and believe that that's a challenging target.
Yeah. Now, so far as Mrs. Byrne was concerned, she put forward a figure of 8 million, 8%. And just so you can give some thought to the thinking behind that, 8% would remove, if there's an additional 3 million people visiting the airport, 8% modal shift would remove approximately 1 million of those 3 million people, move them into public transport. Not of those 3 million, but if there's a modal shift on all of the people using the airport, about another million people. But that would still leave an additional 2 million people travelling to the airport by private car, wouldn't it?
It would, and that's what we've assessed. We've assessed the impact of these additional trips, and in fact on the basis of the mode share target agreed with North Somerset officers, which is lower than what we believe is actually the case. And so that impact has been assessed on a worst case basis.
Okay. And I suppose where we probably disagree is that you are saying that you've assessed the impact of that increase in traffic and made an assessment of whether it's viable or not. And I suppose my role is to represent the people, parish councils, I don't represent the MP, but his views, all of the local authorities have voted against this project. All of the people don't consider it acceptable. Do you not see that your view of what is acceptable or not, it could be wrong?
In terms of the approach we've taken to assessing the impact, it follows guidelines, and that scoping stage that we went through early on, and the draft transport assessment and all the supplementary technical notes were agreed with the transport authorities. So I believe it was the right approach and the appropriate approach and followed the guidelines.
And so I would suggest that in conclusion, that effectively the policy requirement that the airport are required to demonstrate the satisfactory resolution of environmental issues, including the impact of growth on surrounding communities. You haven't addressed that properly at all, have you?
Well, we've assessed what the impact may be, and the impact was agreed as deemed to be insignificant. Okay. So we have assessed it.
I said addressed, not assessed.
Well, we've assessed it and deemed it to be insignificant, therefore not needing to be addressed.
Yes.
Finish. Oh, right, okay. XR elders, do you want some time? Do you want to come down? Yeah. Who's asking the question? Is it going to be you, Mr. Davis? Yes. Whenever you're ready.
Right. Good morning, Mr. Whitcross.
Morning.
If we can turn to section 4 of your proof of evidence. So that's page 17, paragraph 4.2.15.
Yes.
In that, you state the Bristol Airport surface access strategy does not promote an increase in modal share by taxi passengers. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is this approach to restricting or not promoting taxis compatible with the airport support of the MAAS service that includes taxis as part of its key provision?
Yes, it is. The taxi, the reference there to the mode share by taxi is the impact of those taxis coming to and from the airport without a passenger in the return leg. As you can see from our hierarchy, those that are able to carry passengers in both parts of the journey are preferable, and that would be supported a growth in those. But in terms of this is relating to the number of cars and car trips. We're not promoting an increased number of taxis as access to the airport when they're empty in one leg of the journey, because it's a double trip effectively. The mobility as a service proposals are they're being trialled in various parts of the country, but they're a mechanism to bring together a whole package of transport opportunities to travel, and a simplified way of paying for those services and able to join those services together. So the objective is to make best use of all the infrastructure. So if a taxi forms part of a journey where that taxi is being used for a dual function, that would logically form part of a mobility as a service package.
Yes, so you do accept the fact that taxis are a key part of the mobility service and provide a social benefit.
Yeah, they can be, yeah.
Yes. And also, do you accept the other advantage of taxis is that they don't require parking?
Well, when they're in use, they don't require parking, yes, absolutely. They need a facility to stop and set down and pick up, but they don't require permanent parking.
Okay, thank you. Can we turn to the bus services? That's page 13 of your proof on paragraph 4.2.2.
Yes.
As part of your public transport review, did you model a significant reduction in fares for key airport bus services?
No, I didn't.
Could you explain why not? If you want to have an ambitious program to promote public transport, and this would be a key factor in making the modal shift to public transport.
Yeah, the big challenge with that is the commercially operated services. So those services the pricing is controlled by those operators. There is an objective to promote and increase public transport use, and as you're aware, a multimodal pricing review. So the airport is keen to continue to do that, and in terms of the overall package of measures proposed, a significant part of that is subsidising public transport services to enable them to run.
Yes, therefore the principle of...
So the principle is there, but I accept there isn't a detailed model of public transport pricing.
Thank you. On section 9, it's on your Rule 6 statements, so the section 9 at the end, towards the end of your proof, so it's page 90, paragraph 9.4.29, and the table 9.2.
Yes.
Now there's a little asterisk at the bottom of that table where it's noted that these are the lowest range of prices.
Yes.
Were these prices established on that table pre-COVID?
No, these are the most recent
Those
prices.
are the recent ones, thank you. Have you done a viability study using these prices for the car parks?
Viability of...
Well, in order to justify, say, the construction of the multi-storey car park, you'll be required to do a viability study to validate that process.
You mean in terms of the commercial viability of building it? The car
In
park?
terms of the planning consent. Have you done a viability study?
I think we're straying off evidence that this witness has given. This is not a viability witness.
What I'm interested in is if, for instance, the silver zone is subsidizing the ticket price, the parking price of the multi-storey car park. If in the future they lower the silver zone, does that mean that the airport can argue that the multi-storey car park is no longer viable and therefore need not be built?
I'm not sure it's a question for this witness.
No, I mean, the point is the demand studies show that we need both. It's not there may be a phasing as to which comes forward, but we will need both MSCP2, which is consented, MSCP3, and the extensions. All of them are needed. They're not alternatives in that sense.
Okay. Thank you. If referring to the parking demand study 2020, so that's CD 2.23, it's page 15, figure 9. It's something that we've referred to earlier, and it's just at the bottom of that diagram of the chart. This is on autonomous vehicles.
Sorry, which document?
It's CD 2.23, it's the parking demand study of 2020. Page 15.
Yes.
And talking about autonomous vehicles, it says that this is a disruptive technology and it holds the potential to dramatically alter car ownership and parking dynamics.
Yeah, I can't find where you are, but I recognise the text.
Yes, we've discussed it before. In your proof of evidence, going back to that, that's page 102, paragraph 9715. And you refer to the original, you refer to a section in the original parking demand study of 2018 saying that we don't have to worry about autonomous cars because they won't happen before 2030.
Yeah, that was in the original parking demand
Yes.
study, that statement.
Yes, and you referred
Yes.
back to that,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah.
Given that in the evidence you've given over the last few days, in traffic management, you referred to a worst case scenario.
Yes.
It's normal in traffic management to do that.
Yes.
Would it not be the case that if you're looking at forecasting, and we've already seen in the week on forecasting, that 2034 is the slow case scenario under York Aviation,
Yes.
that you ought to be looking at autonomous vehicles for that period, the period before the airport reaches 12 million.
Yes, and I think this is referring back to the no impact before 2030, which was written back in 2018.
Yes, so it was pre-COVID, when that parking study was done. We're now in a post-COVID world where the York Aviation have recognized that there is a possibility of going to 2034 for the 12 million.
Yes, what we've recognised is that autonomous vehicles will be could be a significant disruptor sometime off into the future.
Yes.
Beyond 2034, we don't have the legislation in place and we don't have autonomous vehicles in the market yet. So it will be well beyond 2034 before they will have any significant effect.
It said in the parking demand study 2030.
The 2018
that it
study.
wouldn't be, yes. So, and what I'm coming to is not so much the parking, which you've addressed in your rebuttal, but in the ownership of autonomous vehicles, because...
Yes, so it did say, it basically said they wouldn't have any effect in 2030, in that report when it was written by 2030. So, and that remains the case. What you're referring to, and I understand the point, is in the much longer term, there is the potential, if people give up private car ownership and switch towards shared transport and autonomous transport,
Yes.
there is the longer term potential for the need for parking to be reduced. And that would be picked up through our monitor and manage approach, and only providing once it's evidenced that the demand is there, with the long-term potential to remove parking.
As you said, shared ownership and the fact that autonomous vehicles don't need to park, that this could, and if we go back to the parking demand study, and that phrase, it could dramatically alter car ownership. In that I feel that it's surprising that there hasn't been any anticipation or modelling at this stage to say this could have a big impact on the demand of parking as the airport reaches 12 million.
Yes, it's saying it could have a dramatic impact on car ownership in the long term. What we're assessing here is the impact of the airport expanding to 12 million passengers per annum by 2034, by which point it will have had little or zero impact.
But sorry to go back, you're saying from 2030, in other words, there's a
Well,
period
it was making a statement at the time that
Yes, okay, let's...
beyond, that they wouldn't have any impact, but nobody knows exactly when autonomous vehicles will even be allowed to drive on our roads.
We know that the government is actively promoting it, and it will shortly be allowed under certain conditions. It's obviously happening in California now. But this is a technology which is very fast moving and is coming. So let's leave that here.
I'm not challenging the point that the technology is evolving, but there's a whole raft of, it takes decades for a whole vehicle fleet to change. It takes decades of behaviour change for people to give up car ownership and car use, and it's not as simple as, it won't be an on-off switch. Autonomous vehicles will take decades before the whole network is autonomous. So I take the point that if we were in that place, then we may not need anywhere near as much parking. That's a long way off.
Just as a sort of historical aside, it took 10 years for the Model T Ford to displace horses in America. It can happen. Disruptive technologies can happen.
Absolutely.
Very
I'm not disagreeing with the point. What I'm saying is the practicality, in that case, the practicality of switching from one mode of moving stuff to another was relatively easy, straightforward. What the practicality now is, we have a whole road network with lots of cars on, driven by us people who aren't as good at driving as machines, and it will take decades to go from that transition from where we are now to a fully autonomous network, and indeed people to adopt and accept the behaviour change of not owning a car and having to share transport.
We're going on to decked parking, so the last point. Was decked parking considered for the silver zone in Bell's parking strategy?
Yeah, I believe it was looked at on the base and discounted on the basis of the impact, the visual impact of the decking.
Agreed. So it was considered as one of the options.
It was, as far as I'm aware, yes.
I agree. So is deck parking possible on the long-term parking to the north of the airport?
Deck parking?
Yes.
It's potential to build a deck car park there, you mean? Physically, yes.
For the point of view of the inspectors, deck parking is where there are no foundations. It is columns on a pad foundation which can be adjusted to level to an existing fall and is quickly erected on an existing car park, because it can be done over a down period or at night and so on, and can be dismantled if at a future date there's a multi-story car park being proposed. So it's a solution which is being used in lots of airports. Yes? No.
No.
But I was just trying to give the background to help the inspectors.
Just
so
ask, yeah.
may I ask a question?
Just ask a question, yeah.
I'm sorry. So the question is, has deck parking on the long-term car park been considered as an alternative to expansion into the greenbelt?
The temporary type structure you're describing,
Yes.
I don't believe it has. No.
Why not?
Because I don't think that those are temporary structures, and the airports needs decent,
Okay.
high quality parking structures.
According to the parking study which was cited by Ms. Beth, they can be equally considered permanent structures as well as temporary. They are perfectly valid and they are being installed in other airports. So could we confirm again why, or you haven't considered this as an option?
I'm not sure, in fairness, that Mr. Witchells, who's really the highway witness, is the best person. I think Mr. Mellings, who's coming, who does consider some of the points about Greenbelt and what we could have done in the inset, he may be a better witness, but see where you want to go with it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Richards.
Thank you.
That's all.
Thank you. Mr. Humphreys, do you want to re-examine Mr. Witchells before we finish?
Yes, sir.
How long do you think it could be? We're not rushing you, just...
No, I'm just trying to... About 35, 40 minutes.
Fine.
Mr. Witchells, you were asked some questions yesterday, some of the early questions about the 2.5% public transport improvement commitment, and then a series of questions about what that should be added to, whether it's 15% on the old bus ticket basis or the CAA figure of 21.8%. And I understand the rebasing point, but what's the objective with the extra 2.5%? What are we trying to achieve with that?
Yeah, as part of the overall surface access strategy and sustainable travel objectives, we're trying to reduce the number of car trips on the network, in summary. So we're trying to, where we can, in different ways achieve that shift. And one of the mechanisms to reduce the number of car trips is to get more people to use public transport. Other mechanisms that we've described is to reduce the number of drop-off trips.
And insofar as, obviously, we've got a baseline that can be expressed in two different ways, either by ticket data or CAA data. I mean, if a mechanism could be found to reconcile those, as traffic grows, we monitor both, and when we get to 15% bus ticket, we look at the CAA data. Would that be an acceptable base moving forward, if that's a concern for the council?
Absolutely, that is what is proposed, to avoid any discrepancy over which mode share figure should be used, and to rebase that using an agreed data collection and survey format broadly based on the CAA approach, and to do that on an annual basis rather than the CAA, which is currently every 4 years.
Yes,
also.
I mean, my understanding is that the airport will simply pay the CAA to do its survey annually. Is that your understanding?
That is one of the proposals, that the CAA would
Yes.
have that data collected every year rather than once every 4 years.
Okay, well, we can deal with that at another time, and as to the mechanism, we can discuss that in conditions. The questions then moved on to existing car park capacity, and there was a long series of questions about the permission and what areas had been built on and what residual space was available and so on. And you mentioned at one point the plans that had been sent to all parties for the site visit, and there were two plans. One showed the airport on the way to 12 million, but at a 10 million capacity, and where
Yes.
car parks were, and then again at 12 million. Do you understand there to be any dispute physically as to what those plans show in terms of the capacity at those points in time?
No, those numbers are consistent with the numbers in the parking demand study, and they show clearly where each zone is and how many spaces are in each of those zones.
And, if it would be helpful to sit down with the council officers, whoever, and just go through that to explain what the areas are and the numbers of spaces in each area. I mean, could that be done if there's any doubt about this?
Absolutely.
And then there was a period of questions where you were asked about car parking demand, and again, in effect, the thrust of the questions was about whether demand might be lower than is calculated in the parking demand study, and whether therefore we were over providing car parking spaces. Can we just look first at the parking demand study update? That is CD 2.23. And perhaps look at page 20, PDF page 20, and it's figure 15. And we have there the month. Do you have it?
Yeah. Yes.
We have there the month-by-month figures for overall demand. So, and you mentioned the figure on a number of occasions of demand, total demand in 2030 being 30,000. Can you just identify the figure you're pointing to there?
Yes, it's the second chart in figure 15, the column that says August. You've got 30.2k as the peak demand in that month.
So that's the peak demand for the airport that has to be met. And then if we kind of flick back perhaps to figure 12 on page 17.
Yeah.
These are now looking at annual demand figures, but
yes,
what we had there was a monthly breakdown, and you can see that of the annual demand, the overall demand for parking for the airport, of course, a lot of discussion on it with Ms. Sutherland this morning, that there's an assumption that only a certain percentage of it is met at the airport, and some of it is met elsewhere.
yes.
And what, again, let's touch on, I guess, with Ms. Sutherland this morning, what's the attitude of the council to the off-site car parking, which may be authorised in the sense that it's 28-day permitted uses, but we've heard a lot from PCAA witnesses and others about their views of car parks popping up around the countryside for
Yes.
28 days. What's the council's attitude, whether or not it's authorised, what's the council's attitude to that as an activity in the countryside?
Well, that in our discussions with officers, they have raised concerns about that, and clearly part of our strategy reflects that in the desire to provide an affordable offer that would reduce those impacts of those off-airport car parks popping up.
So, in that context, where it is said, well, look, the overall demand for car parking at the airport might be less than you have forecast, does that necessarily lead to the conclusion that there should be less of that demand met at the airport?
No, what we can clearly see is there is an overall demand that far exceeds the level we're proposing, the 22,300. And it would be beneficial, therefore, to be able to, if we would, as part of our objective, if we would like to remove some of those car parks that do pop up, as you say, authorised on a 28-day basis, for example, then we would want to be able to provide and cater for those. So there is that, what I refer to as latent demand, those additional demands for spaces that we could soak up and minimise the likelihood of that happening.
Then there was a separate but related point, which was there was a long series of questions that led us to look at Mr. Henderson's table entitled NSC Cross-Examination of SW. That's the title
Yes,
it's got.
yeah.
And in essence, the point is this, and if you could have open both the original parking demand study, CD 2.11, and also the parking demand study update, I can just take you to two things in each of those documents that encapsulates the issue. So, in the original parking demand study, could you turn to page 24, and it's figure 20?
Yes.
And look in Mr. Henderson's table, line 5.
Yes.
Under 2018 PDS.
Yes.
And you have there his data.
Yes.
I mean, we went through a long exercise, but that's the data with a 15% in the original PDS, in a 15% public transport mode share. You're getting 21,900 spaces to be provided
Yes.
at the airport, and with 12.5% public transport mode share, 22,600.
Yes.
Yes? And if we look at sort of equivalent data in the updated study, I suppose we can look at it, we can see it on page 18 of the document, table 2, sorry, figure 18, table 2, figure 18, sorry, not figure 18.
Figure 13.
Problem with numbers, sir. Figure 13.
Yes.
Figure 13.
Yes.
Ignore me when I talk about numbers. Figure 13, you get to the 22,200.
Yes.
And in essence, Mr. Henderson's point, which is with 17.5%, in essence, Mr. Henderson's point is, look, how is it that the public transport mode share has gone up, but instead of the parking spaces falling, they've gone up by whatever it is, 300.
Yes.
Out of over 22,000, they've gone up. Now, can we just sort of try and understand that? So perhaps go back in the updated study to PDF page 5. And towards the bottom of PDF page 5, in CD 2.23, you get a long table with lots of things that have changed between the two studies. Headlines: overall passenger demand, UK foreign split of passenger demand, geographical segmentation of UK demand, CAA passenger survey, occupancy demand ratio, Bristol Airport parking capacity.
Yes.
In broad terms, how have those different factors, when fed into the model, it's the same model, how have those different factors, when led into the same model, meant that you have more public transport initiatives, but you're not achieving quite the reduction in parking? And perhaps as part of that, you can bring in your parking demand, your ASAS modal hierarchy, in the point that I put to Mr. Collis about moving people to public transport, not always taking them, meaning that they don't park.
Yes. So the range of factors you mentioned there in Table 1 are influencing the demand for parking. As I've mentioned in previous questions, the home geography, the demographic, the group size, the time of travel, those sorts of things. The updated parking demand study is based on the new aviation forecast from York Aviation, which differ from the original study, and that projects the new segmentation in terms of market demand and demographics and geographic areas. So that's one part that could have a significant effect. The other part, in terms of that hierarchy, is that to achieve betterment in terms of reduced car trips, public transport use is a key tool. It's one of the tools. The other one is to reduce the number of trips that are made by drop-offs and taxis that are empty for one part of the leg, and that's another target area to reduce those overall car trips. So what that means is if we're successful in that area, it may mean that some of those would go to public transport. That's our highest up the hierarchy. That's what we'd like to do first. However, if we can get them to park rather than get dropped off or get a taxi for one part of the leg, that is also an improvement, i.e. a reduction in the car trips on the network. And that, once you go into the detail, that helps explain why you might not get the same answer. You'll get an overall reduction in car trips, but you might not see exactly the same number proportionately in terms of change in car parking demand.
Let's just take an example. It's just a hypothetical example, but let's take the example of the bus service, the additional bus service to Nailsea.
Yes.
So not that far from the airport. And what's the propensity of someone in Nailsea likely to be to do drop-off or take a taxi to the airport compared with, say, someone in Reading? Who's more likely to drop off?
Well, that's a key point, the demographic and the distribution of the passengers. So yes, the closer you are, then the more attractive, you'll be able to get someone to drive you that far to drop off, for example, because it's not so far. And a taxi will be a lower cost. So it's more likely that you'll use those modes to get to the airport than if you're much, much further away.
What happens, though, if that person with that propensity is now we manage to shift to public transport because we provide a bus?
But that's what we would like to achieve. That's absolutely our target, to target those areas where we can.
So in those
introduce
circumstances,
buses.
does providing the bus to these local areas have the same effect in terms of reducing people that actually drive to the airport and then park for 2 weeks?
Where we can provide a bus to a local area, it takes away those drop-off and taxi trips.
Right. So, looking at that comparison between the 2018 study and the updated study and the new CAA data and other things, and that there is a small increase in the number of parking spaces, should that be surprising to the inspectors?
I don't think it should be, no. I think we can, when you delve into those issues around the demographics and the distribution, in the overall magnitude, that difference of 300, I don't think is surprising or substantial.
Then, very briefly on this, and not to go into it in any detail more really for the inspector's note, in Mr. Collis's rebuttal, he asked about those three, it was on the final page, he asked about those three sets of data, and you said on several occasions that the data had been provided, and I think Mr. Ware said we've had enough information, please no more. Sadly, sir, I'm afraid you've already had it. I hadn't realised, but it's already there. So if you don't mind, Mr. Witchell, just for the sake of form, can we just identify the 3 documents? So if we look in the INQ series of documents, INQ 033 is car occupancy data. That was the first of Mr. Collis's requests there, and there's a long table of data there. And INQ 034, the next was calculations and analysis to verify additional parking demand identified. And my understanding is that's 034. This is this very, very long table with group sizes and trip purposes and income, all domestic, international, and all of that stuff. It goes on for 26 sides. Not suggest we look at that. And then the final one, which we have seen before, was the assessment of mode share to determine how revised increase in public transport usage, and that's the table that we've seen before with the 6 initiatives. Was that what you were referring to when you said to Mr. Henderson you thought the data had been provided?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we don't need to look at it anymore. And then we came on to some questions on public transport, and you were taken to the TAA, and it was put to you that the TAA hadn't specifically mentioned the Airport Policy Framework or Aviation 2050, but had mentioned the NPPF, and you said, well, those other documents were mentioned in other parts of the overall suite of application documents. If we, again, very briefly, just look at the MPPF, so you need document CD 5.8.1. And could you turn to paragraph 104, which is on PDF page 30.
Yes.
And the points that were put to you in the APF and Aviation 2050 were related to promoting public transport and those sorts of things. And
Yes.
we look at paragraph 104D, so transport issues should be considered from the earlier stages of plan making and development proposals, so that the environmental effects, impacts of traffic and transport infrastructure can be, sorry, C, not D. Apologies. Opportunities to promote walking, cycling and public transport use are identified and pursued. So firstly, I mean, you might not have cited the APF and Aviation 2050, but you're an experienced transport planner. Did you realise that there was an objective of improving public transport and cycling and so on?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Fundamental, and it, as I say, it formed part of the early scoping discussions, was fully understood, and all of those things were assessed.
And in your view, has the project complied with this aspect of policy?
Yes, it has.
And Then there were some questions about the 2.5% and whether you've done work to try and identify more measures. And we know from your table 6.3 in your proof that in fact the measures you identify, it's on page 63 of your proof, the
Yes.
measures you identify do in fact go slightly beyond 2.5%. Just explain to the inspectors why isn't it that you set 2.9% as the target? That's a legitimate question. I mean,
Yes. Yeah, I think, as I said, the package of measures proposed here is a potential suite of measures. So what I did is look at the catchment areas, the areas of that population that I think would be most credibly transferable to public transport. Looked at those initiatives, introduced them to those areas to have a look. So I was introducing a whole raft of measures and initiatives, and as I say, not all of which may be implemented, not all of which may be successful. So what I wanted to see is if I put all of those in and I assess the areas that could benefit from public transport and might shift, what answer would that give me? And that gave me that range. And I wanted to see, one, that the 2.5% was ambitious, therefore I put in a whole raft of measures, and two, that it was achievable, and three, that actually there's some flexibility in there. The upper end of the 2.9 would mean that absolutely everything went in and absolutely everything was successful, which in my experience of a transport planner over years of trying to get people to change mode, there are a number of sites where we have subsidised buses, for example, the first 3 years that have then not been viable and have had to stop running. So we hope that certainly isn't the case, but
yes.
that variation of range needs to reflect that. So if everything is really successful, we might get to that 2.9, but that would be good, but an extreme achievement.
I mean, here, Mr. Richards, you're clearly seeking to influence the individual travel decisions of millions of people travelling
Yes.
to the airport, millions of people. How does the obligation that we have proposed work in terms of, we can see it when we look at the obligation, but key performance indicators and stuff? How do the initiatives sort of translate through KPIs into seeking to meet the objective? How does that work?
Yes, so the purpose of the KPIs, of course, is to understand whether what you're introducing, what you're investing in, has that desired effect. So you might, for example, start to run a new service to a community that doesn't have a service at the moment, but there are trips to and from the airport. That service you'd introduce, you'd monitor its use, you'd promote its use. If after, say, 12, 18 months, nobody was using it in spite of a lot of promotion, your KPI would indicate that. And it would say, okay, we need to rethink this, then we need to introduce something different or invest in another area. So you need that flexibility to change in order to achieve that KPI.
And then the questions turn to surface access infrastructure, and I don't think there's anything I need to ask you about that. So I think we then get to Mr. Renshaw today on staff car parking. Oh, and he was obviously consistent with his client's case, asking you about staff car parking and mode shares and proportion of staff that would have to be attracted by different forms of travelling to the airport. Could I just get you in your proof of evidence to look at your tables 6.8 and 6.9, which is on pages 67 and 68.
Yeah.
And table 6.8 is looking at the effects of bus improvements on staff travel and existing bus share at 12 million, the target mode share. And
Yes.
we can see, for example, for bus, sort of 3 lines, 3 rows from the bottom, bus, target mode share 23.1%.
Yes.
For the bus covered area. And if we turn over the page, again in that table, 3 lines from the bottom in the bus column, again we pick up that 23%.
Yes. Yeah.
And we can contrast that with the 2 rows below the 13%. So what the analysis is showing you, that you get a higher proportion of staff coming by bus in the bus catchment area, which is this targeted area, not surprisingly, than you do more generally. And we can see the other percentages. Again, you know, to what extent is the strategy here and the targeting realistic?
Again, it's one of the key aspects of understanding and setting mode share targets is to make sure you can deliver on them. And it's the same approach really to say where would the investment be most effective? How can we achieve these shifts? And that table summarises what the difference would be between what we consider to be the bus catchment area and areas outside of there. So I believe that the way we've done it, looking at where people are coming from and looking at whether we think a bus service could be attractive, is the right way to do it and is a realistic assessment.
And then moving on, Amanda Sutherland asked some questions about a number of things to do with off-site car parking, obviously, and including what work both the airport and indeed the council had done to identify off-airport car parks, and you talked about the aerial surveys and so on. Mr. Richards, what are the challenges for both the authority, but also in a sense for the airport, in identifying off-airport car parking which relies on 28-day permitted development rights,
Yes.
and therefore can literally change from month to month? What are the challenges in identifying an accurate picture of that, and practically what's the value of that when it can change a month later?
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly very difficult, if not almost impossible, to know where these sites are going to pop up. And to do that, you would have to be regularly looking around those routes on an almost weekly basis to see if a new site had popped up. It would be a huge challenge to, and resource-hungry implication to have to do that the whole time. And even then, you would probably miss some because they can pop up, as you say, within 28-day
But it was then
permitted development.
put to you, look, because there are some of these off-site car parks, that proved that providing low-cost car parking at the airport and the council's enforcement procedures just kind of weren't working. I think you were told you should adopt another strategy. I mean, what's your view of the counterfactual if the Silver Zone car parking hadn't been provided over the years, and if the council had not enforced, what's your view as to what would have happened in the surrounding areas?
Yes, as I think I said, the silver zone parking does offer something for that type of passenger who's more price sensitive, and clearly had the silver zone not been there, then it would have led to even more of these off-airport car parks popping up.
Final point. Mr. Morehouse again asked you some questions, and he used, as I think, junction 7, the A38 and the A4174, I think, as an exemplar of a
Yes.
wider point he was
Yeah.
making. But he made the point that, look, you've looked at that junction, but you haven't seen how the traffic has distributed beyond that. And then he made, in effect, a similar point about more local roads. Obviously, we can recall what the MPPF paragraph 111 tells us about the approach to
Yes.
highways, but just generally in terms of assessing these things, why is there, explained with the council, there was a sort of threshold, and then
Yes,
below that
yeah.
you don't set. Why?
It's really to understand whether the magnitudes of those impacts are significant, and then, as you say, in MPP terms, whether they're severe. But those thresholds need to be realistic. So things like where the day-to-day variation in traffic flows, for example, would outstrip the additional traffic that you're maybe adding. If you're adding a few vehicles, you couldn't even measure or monitor it because day-to-day variation would already be higher than that. Right. So that's the sort of reason why you set these thresholds.
Thank you. So those are my questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Whitchalls. Oh yes, thank you for reminding me. Yeah, it's just one last thing about this before we finish. Whilst you're here, this note that we've had, and this just takes us back to M5 Junction 22. Just looking at towards the back of the document, there's a section there on the second to last page that's underlined M5 Junction 22 scheme proposed by the applicant.
I've just opened
You
the
got
email.
that?
Yes, I've got it. Thanks.
Yeah. Fine.
Great. Thank you. Thanks.
So in that section, what they say is that the applicant's consultant prepared and submitted proposals to mitigate Junction 22, and then that National Highways reviewed this. That was news to me because the only scheme I'd seen up until I read that was the Somerset County Council drawing that was attached to the back of the statement of common ground. I had never seen a drawing for that junction from the applicant. So just what I want to ask is that accurate? And if it is there any other analysis that went with that drawing, that scheme that I haven't seen?
I don't think that description is accurate.
You don't think that's correct?
I don't think so. I know we looked at our impacts and we maybe tabled a couple of sketches, but they were never formally submitted.
There was never a scheme, never your own?
We didn't work up a detailed scheme,
Right.
no.
When you say you looked at your impact, is that just the very crude, high-level information that I've already got?
Yes, exactly. The traffic flows coming through the
It doesn't look
junction.
at existing flows, there's no counts at that junction?
We didn't do detailed assessments, no.
Okay, well, I think that answers that question. Anything else? Right. Okay, well, have a relaxing weekend, everybody, and we'll see you on Tuesday morning. The inquiry is adjourned. Thank you.